welcome to this lesson about Eco-Gastronomy in action for the European project Agri-Tour. As we've seen, the agritourism strategies are within a general sustainable consumption strategy applied in Europe, and we've seen that the topic of promoting sustainable consumption through agritourism is not simple because it's inside a more broad set of strategy. This is applied in the European level, but also about simple human decision making concerning food. So even if strategies are existing for promoting sustainable and healthy consumption and healthy dietary habits, it is not always easy to promote at the systemic level. Agritourism is a little part of the overarching strategy, but still the agritourism are based on the consumption of local food and sustainable organic food. So healthier options are often promoted within agritourism. The concept of well-being within agritourism, of course, does not refer only to food consumption, but also about recreational activities, sports activities, outdoor activities, nature-based activities, and so on. We've seen so in the previous lecture that there are many things to do, in the sense that regulations can be improved, strategies to promote sustainable consumption can be improved. But there is one point. So even if the topic is complex, we have to be very concrete and start with little simple steps. If consumers are not informed enough, their decision making about food can be only weak. And even when consumers are informed, so they have a knowledge about healthy and sustainable food and the role of agritourism and so on, in general, human decision making have many limits. This actually is one of the key topics of essentially the only main Nobel Prize obtained by a psychologist, or we would say better, a researcher, a professor of psychology. Daniel Kahneman was an Israeli psychologist and professor, and he won the Nobel Prize together, shared with Amos Tversky in 2002, integrating economics and psychology. Essentially, this integration demonstrated a set of biases that humans do when they face a decision-making task. Within the previous psychological framework, essentially, there has been tendencies to consider the human being as a rational decision maker. Lately, we discovered that instead humans follow mind shortcuts that can lead to systematic errors. These systematic errors are called in psychology cognitive biases. So all the research of Daniel Kahneman showed consistently this set of biases and showed that our economic decision, including food decision making, are affected by these cognitive biases. Of course, biases can be known by those designing services and used in order to encourage positive decision making, healthy sustainable food, but could also be used negatively in order to essentially maximize the profit, even selling options, services which are not sustainable. We truly believe that agritourism is a nice framework. It's a framework really based on the nature. It's a framework really based on the natural product of agriculture and valorizing truly the territories. We have a case study in Italy and the data showing that agritourism can promote also the economic sustainability of farming companies. In Italy, for example, secondary activities in farming produce 20% of the income. And so we think that we can adopt a psychological framework to promote the participation in this specific form of tourism, which is highly sustainable, the agritourism. But let's see what the research is telling about how people decide what to eat, which is a broad topic. Okay, I don't want to simplify. I know what I will tell will be limited under some point of view, but I want to catch the point on some issues impacting on our decision making. So, according to Daniel Kahneman, humans has a limited rational capacity, not because of the IQ, not because of the general intelligence of the participant or the person of the study or the consumer, but simply humans has a limited rational capacity because of the limits, the systemic, the structural limits in memory, attention, and capacity to calculate. So whatever is, let's say, the intelligence level, anyhow, all of us have a limited capacity of memory. Our brief term memory is very limited. Our working memory is truly limited. We cannot have in our mind at the same moment too many concepts, as well as our attention as a limit, and also our capacity to calculate as a limit. Since decision making, true decision making should consider a big variety of factors, we need to simplify reality to take decision. So even a very simple consumption pattern, I want to buy a tomato sauce, really could imply tons of variables in the decision making: price, cost, value, structure, industry, provenience, and so on. I mean, all these elements could be amplified and let's say opened, and of course bring to, let's say, difficulties in decision making. That's why we cannot apply truly rationality till the end when we buy things. That's a problem. So starting from this theoretical framework, then we have data in Europe on how European citizens decide what to eat. There is a very, very interesting Eurobarometer. The Eurobarometer is a tool used by the European Commission in order to make surveys across the population through the cooperation, of course, of all the National Institute of Statistics. In Europe, there is a European Institute of Statistics, which is composed by the National Institute of Statistics, called Eurostat. Eurostat, in cooperation with the European Food Safety Authority, has implemented a Eurobarometer called Food Safety in the EU. And it's a very long report. Every 3 years we have a new version showing the tendency, the trends across the European citizens. And one of the questions catch my attention because they try to identify what are the drivers, what are the factors that actually leads the citizens in deciding what to eat. So they checked and they asked to the participants of the study from the 28 countries to define what are the factors, the most important factors in defining what to eat: cost, taste, nutritional values, environment, ethics and beliefs, and so on. And so the big question is, what is the first factor adopted by the European citizens for decision making concerning food? Now, in the previous Eurobarometer, first factor was cost. So cost is the main driver. After food inflation, food cost inflation, of course, this became stronger. But of course, as you can see, focusing on the cost, so focusing on selecting the cheapest option, brings together a set of problems, because normally low-cost options may have other issues in terms of nutritional values, in terms of many other aspects. Second factor selected by in percentage by the European citizens is taste. Again, here, of course, the taste is the result of many things. And as you can see, even if there are lots of strategies to promote knowledge concerning food, it's very evident that in general citizens focus on the most immediate reactions, most immediate perception about food, because cost is easily understandable, taste is even, very easy to be understood. We all know if something is expensive or not for us, or if we like or not something. I mean, even a little kid or even a newborn or even truly at the earliest stage of our life, we can tell we like it or not. Okay, enjoyment and disgust, let's say, are primary emotions. This means that we all know if we like something or not. See then, third factor preferred by the European citizens is the geographical origin, and this is very interesting because, of course, the agritourism could use this element because, of course, in Europe we have a scheme for the recognition of geographical indication of food. So actually, this data shows that Europeans are truly focused on the geographical origin and the agritourism by using only or mostly local ingredients, of course, can boost the use of geographical indications. If you think it's a lot, I mean, cost and taste and geographical origins comes before then food safety or nutritional value, which let's say are the most important elements. Food safety, as you can see, is very similar to geographical origin, but comes after. And of course, we cannot say that cost and food safety are proportionally opposite always. Because actually, you may have low cost items that are also safe tendentially and healthy. But tendentially, when on the same category of products, when there is a cost which is truly too low, there may be issues, not in terms of safety, because if you have followed the checks, at least the general safety should be there, but on the long term, of course, maybe something truly unhealthy. So these are, I mean, tendentially opposite. Only after the fifth position, 41% selecting this among the most important elements, nutritional factors. Nutritional factors are truly important. I cannot say what's the most important in general because it depends on the personal predisposition, but I think that safety and nutritional factors should come before the geographical origin, despite the importance of this. And again, this is the fifth element. Environmental impacts and ethical beliefs in reality are not truly selected by the European citizens as one of the main drivers. Now you may have many explanations of this ranking: cost, taste, and so on. Cost, taste, geographical origins, food safety, nutritional factors, environmental impact, and ethics and beliefs follow a sequence that may be explained by many ways. But as I told before, cost and taste produce a primary reaction. Okay, the cost you immediately pay, and the taste you immediately know if you like it or not. Geographical origin is still kind of evident, but issues related to food safety, you may understand it or not, only if you have a big failure in the food safety, so if you don't feel well after eating something. Nutritional factors require some skills, so a consumer may be more or less informed on how to read the nutritional factors, how to read the food labels, may have a general knowledge or a very specific one. So depending on the level of knowledge and the importance for that participant, that consumer, to follow nutritional factors, at the same time, it's not something that everybody understands in, let's say, in the same way. More difficult is to define the environmental impact of a food, because as I showed you in the previous lesson, the Green Claims Directive is still operating in order to make this more transparent and more clear and more, let's say, standardized. Ethics and belief becomes a little bit more abstract. But why disorder? Why European citizens, and it would be very nice to reproduce another study in the Pacific Ocean, but why people focus mostly and first of all about cost and taste? Why this comes before? Why the European Barometer Food Safety in the EU found this data? We can have many explanations, but our brain prioritizes strongly what has immediate effects in terms of pain and pleasures. Primary reactions are the first reactions we consider in deciding. Okay, the more reasoning around food is complex, abstract, based on many variables, require prior knowledge. The latest will be the effect on the fast decision making process. Fast decision making process is pain or pleasure. And of course, also in the way in which we promote food, we have to consider this as a primary reactions. So we have to understand that, of course, taste and cost is the key variable. All the other things like safety, nutritional factors, or geographical indication, if you run an agritourism, can be drivers to be used in your communication in order to stimulate a reaction. That's clear. But it's also very important to know that maybe that consumer needs some prior knowledge to process this information. Your role as an operator in the field of agritourism is also to make information and education while selling services. Because, of course, food science and food in general is a very wide set of action. You can replicate this in terms of agritourism actions also in many others activities, but these two are truly important. So pain and and pleasure are connected to neural pathways and areas. So of course this is fully studied. It's a topic that have enough knowledge and research to say yes, it's very clear what happens when we are in front of a social rewarding or any motivational rewarding activity. So all activities related to pleasure and more or less mechanism related to pain are also well studied. Of course, we never say we know everything about a subject, but there are enough evidences to say our brain process pain and pleasure through specific mechanisms. The set of areas and let's say the circuit, the brain circuit related to the processing of pleasure, including pleasure related to the eating activities, is called the reward circuit. So the point is that this Eurobarometer food safety in the EU shown that the European citizens' knowledge about food safety is decreasing. And it's also decreasing, according to the Sustainable Development in the European Union report, are also decreasing reading skills, science competencies, and mathematics. 1 out of 5 at 15 years old in Europe have insufficient skills in this sense. So understand that if you want to run an agritourism and around that options, you focus a lot on the food activities. I will show you in the lesson about agritourism that food tasting is the main service in the agritourism economies in Italy. So to replicate this in Fiji, Samoa and Vanuatu is of course a new topic, but still this is an indication. But for understanding food, you need a good competence and good knowledge about food production, processing, and consumption. So what agritourism can do is to facilitate this knowledge through educational activities, through campaign information while selling services, because agritourism, of course, are companies. Again, also, the way in which we present food has been demonstrated to be effective on our food consumption patterns. In Europe, there is a discussion, as the system is not applied everywhere in Europe, but also in the way in which we present food labels. For example, we have the list of ingredients. If you read the list of ingredients on the left, we probably need a degree in chemistry or food technology. Instead, the Nutri-Score, so the semaphore light icon on the right, is easily understandable. Of course, you know, and everybody have intuition that the green options are better than the red options. Then, of course, maybe the list of ingredients is more completed, but you need a degree. And also maybe the Nutri-Score on the right is a simplification, because of course nutrition is something very personal. Okay, every body, let's say, is different. So, how our brain processes information about food decision making, and in what way agritourism can take advantage from this science in order to have good results and promote sustainable consumption. We've seen that our brain, let's say, basic version of what our brain naturally do when selecting food is assessing taste and cost, the most immediate reactions. Now, since considering this is, let's simplify the natural reaction of our brain, considering the immediate pleasure and pain connected to food. We have to consider that naturally there are specific types of food that activates more the reward circuit. The reward circuit is that set of areas that our brain activates when processing any positive pleasure related activity, not only food, all the pleasure related activities. Now, there is a study by Pinel of the 2000, but it's an evergreen, it's not something to be updated, we know this, is that fat and sugar, the combination of fat and sugar, so ingredients with high calories, predict more the activation of the reward circuit. These probably have an explanation because, of course, in the past, with the low presence of food that is truly filling and give you a high amount of calories, of course, this in the past would be related with survival. So, of course, in the past, high calories predict more the activation of the reward circuit. This is still true today, but the food industry, of course, changed the way in which we process this information. Of course, as you can see, it's easier to sell chocolate rather than selling wild herbs, because wild herbs, no fat, no sugar, bitter chocolate. The processed chocolate, of course, not the cocoa, but the processed chocolate may have hydrogenated fats related with milk and sugar, and so of course it's easier. And there is a neurophysiological mechanism. This kind of foods activates more the reward circuit. There is a study, there are studies that truly can compare highly palatable food like chocolate with herbs, and obviously the reward circuit activates more in the first case. And another more interesting study is a study by Papilles of 2013 that showed even without any visual stimuli, so without presenting the food physically, even food related words can activate the reward circuit. So the word chocolate produces a different reaction if compared with the word rice or apple. So we have taste and low cost as the main activator of our reward circuit. Fat and sugar. So this is not providing a very optimistic view of the neuroscience of food. Because of course, if we know that strategically these type of elements are producing higher motivational reactions in our brains, of course this is not very good. So many studies demonstrated, as I told you, the limited rationality in decision making. This is a set of research by Daniel Kahneman, and of course all the entire, let's say, group of researchers that worldwide study the human behaviors when taking a decision making process. One of the most quoted studies, only because of course it's quoted a couple of the most famous brands, for example, studied the reaction in the use of brand when producing, of course, decision making processes, that compared in the US the reactions in drinking Coca-Cola or Pepsi, that of course are kind of beverage of the same category, are soft drinks with a similar, let's say, style and taste. A study, for example, studied the research studied the palatability of the two beverage while showing the brands, so showing that glass A is Coca-Cola and glass B is Pepsi. And in that case, won the most famous brand, so Coca-Cola, The point is that if you repeat this experiment as a blind test, which means showing two glasses without telling what is Coca-Cola and what is Pepsi, so using anonymous glass, the consumers prefer Pepsi. And this is very interesting because it shows that the palatability for the same group of people, palatability is personal, but palatability in the same group of people shown an advantage for Pepsi, but the power of brand, under some points of view, has shown uh, high results by Coca-Cola. And this is also very interesting under my point of view, because in theory we should tell I like this beverage because I like it, but instead the way in which we present the food stimuli affect also how we process food. Then there are studies on all types of beverage, so the irrationality of human beings and the possibility to affect the decision making has been widely studied. There's also a study about wine. Wine is one of the national beverage in Italy, is also one of the main producer of wine, is also the most biodiverse because of course by considering the variety of grapes present in Italy, of course there is not only red and white wine, but of course wine goes around the different grapes. Now, in order to make a study to compare the decision making process and the evaluation processes that people do around food, you have to compare within the same experimental condition essentially the same product in the same conditions by changing only one variable, only one thing across two experimental conditions. So, of course, if in a group A I show a good wine and a group B I show a bad wine, of course I don't have a control on the context. So, what happened in these studies? We had a couple of group of consumers that had to evaluate the price of a wine. So, you have to taste it and then tell, okay, in my opinion, this wine cost 5 euros, for example. Of course, this experiment tried to understand if the context can change our evaluation about the wine. In theory, you should drink the wine and understand if you like it or not. And depending on the taste, on the smell, and all, let's say, the sensorial elements, you should have your personal taste, and in theory, a good wine should be preferred to a bad wine, according to your personal taste. And consequently, if something that you like a lot, and if you have a knowledge about, let's say, the pricing of the wines, you should tell something accurate. So what happened in this specific study, of course, we had two experimental conditions with the same bottle of wine. Contextual elements was the same setting, same physical setting, same wine, same label, same conditions. But in the first experimental condition, that same wine was just shown, explained, tasted by the consumer, and then the consumer had to say a number of his estimate about the cost of that wine. The second experimental condition was the same wine, same label, same context, same everything, but with classical music. Classical music is not something that has a relationship with the wine flavor and quality. If that wine is a wine of 3 euros, we should not enhance the flavor or the reactions. But what happened? Group A tasted the wine without music. Group B tasted the same wine with classical music. And in theory, we should have similar average of the estimates of value of that wine. But what happened? The wine presented with classical music was overestimated in terms of value by the 75%, which is a lot. This study shown that the contextual factors affects the way in which we experiment food, because it gives a frame, because essentially it can move our attention in another way or specifically in another direction, because it set a context in which that specific ingredient is tasted. and also may enhance the expectation we have around food. That's the point. So the wine was the same, but the perceptions changed. There is also another very interesting study, not made in an experimental condition, but in a real shop, in a real wine shop, that showed that the type of music, so using a background music of French music, increased the sales of French wines. So imagine even the, let's say, sound elements recalling France more moved the attention, unconsciously of course, the attention of consumers in preferring French wine. They also replicated with German wines, and it happened the same. They didn't try it with Italian, but okay, I'm sure that the process is the same cognitive process. That shows that, of course, we are not objective decision makers when selecting food, that the context can, of course, increase and valorize our activities, valorize also our products, that music is a good idea. At the same time, there are also a set of studies showing that on one side, music can set a frame, so of course it can enhance the experience, let's say. It's also true that predominance of music during food tasting is, let's say, problematic. I cannot say totally problematic, but the point is that, as we've seen before, human beings has a limited capacity in attention, decision making, memory processes, and so on. So this is the limit. So what happens if your music is predominant? If your music is predominant, but can be any, let's say, acoustic stimuli, can be the TV, can be even the waiter talking too much, can be anything. This distracts attention of the consumers from food to something else. So if your goal within an agritourism is to provide a high quality service and truly make the consumer focusing on the food taste, you should not distract them, including with music or anything else. So this music, if present, should be very, very moderate, because moving the attention of the consumer on something else cannot be too much. Another experiment was very, very interesting. Operated with a sample of sommelier. The sommelier is a profession, and it's also a qualification that you achieve after 3 levels of trainings for professional of the wine tasting. This kind of profession is present in some restaurant in order to provide pairing in the menu setting, including agritourism, and providing the best combination between food and wine. If sommelier is a profession that essentially goes around wine, which is anyhow a kind of expensive items, recently some vocational education and training centers provided also regional qualification for other products, for example, tasting the olive oil or testing beer and so on. So there are these kind of testers that are, let's say, assistant in the restaurants for providing this pairing or giving suggestion about wine, which is a complex beverage. Now, what's the point? In the previous research, the research about classical music, essentially there was normal consumers defining their expected value of wine. So what happens, of course, ordinary consumers may have not a highly technical competence in defining the wine. So yeah, they can express their taste, but they are not so sophisticated in the evaluation. So a possible criticism of the previous research is that, of course, it's, let's say, easier to mislead the attention of an ordinary consumer. It's more difficult to drive the attention of a sommelier, who's somebody who did a study and applied strongly their capacity to recognize even little and different sensorial elements of wine. This was very interesting because it was a study that shown the neurophysiological reactions of sommelier while tasting, And essentially here the manipulation in the experiment was that, again, we had two experimental conditions. In this case, the sample of participant was composed by sommelier experts, and the manipulation was, in the first scenario, the wine was presented as a wine whose value is 5 euros. In the second case, it was the same wine but was presented as a wine with a value of 100 euros. So, of course, what happened? In theory, the same wine would be maybe cheap in the first version and overestimated in the second. But sommelier should tell, okay, this is a good price, for the price is a good wine. In the second case, they should say 100 euro is a lot for this wine. So in theory, you should have positive frame in the first, and maybe a little bit of, let's say, remorse in selecting a wine of that type, 100 euros with that qualities. But what happened? In reality, even experts overestimated by the 50% of the scale the taste of the wine of 100 euros. In reality, even experts has been misled by the pricing. And this is not only because essentially we are not machine when we are talking about taste. So this is important when you plan a food taste activity in the agritourism. But this is also explainable at the neurophysiological level. Because of course, if you are a wine expert and somebody tells you this wine bottle is 5 euros, automatically we all know that the value for a high quality wine is minimum 10, 15 euros, 20 euros. These are normally priced for quality wines. And 100 euro is for top wines, very expensive wines. So of course, in the mind of the sommelier, when telling 5 euros, expectation can be only low. When you say 100 euros, imagine the sommelier think that they will taste a very good wine. They expect to taste a very good wine. It's very rare to find a bad wine costing 100 euros. So what happens in the mind of the assessor, the sommelier, the expectation is high. He starts to activate the reward circuit, and this affects how they taste by focusing especially on the most positive elements of that wine because are expected and their attention is there. And only this use of food expectation brought experts to overestimate the taste of wine. This is not to tell overprice your services. This is to tell the expectation you put while doing a food tasting can affect the way in which the consumer are essentially processing that food. So this is applied in wine, but you can apply in any type of product. There is also another study about meat. Just I show you these studies because it can be replicated. Okay, it can be replicated in any type of item. This is very famous because it was the same meat presented at the 75% light in another condition as the 25% fat, which is essentially the same thing. If 75% is light, the other part is fat. So essentially, information received by consumers was the same, but in the first case, the frame was light meat. In the second, it was fat meat. Guess what consumer preferred among the two? It was the same product. It was, of course, the light. So the first, let's say, research on the neuroscience of food is maybe not very encouraging because demonstrated strongly that, of course, junk food, highly fat and sugar food, low cost food, and so on, potentially it's activating the reward circuit and so bring people to overeat that type of food. But luckily and recently there is a trend of research showing how to encourage healthy and sustainable food. Low cost food, sugar, fat and taste are, let's say, the easiest pathway, but there is a way to promote the use of sustainable food and the consumption of sustainable food. Let's see how to transform fat, sugar, cost, and taste in food meaning, food culture, values, and education. One, whatever is, let's say, the personal thinking around the Nutri-Score, traffic lights demonstrated their efficacy. So labels can shape decision making concerning food. So, for example, this Nutri-Score is not adopted in Italy, also because many of our typical products actually would rank very low. If you think to prosciutto, or if you think to any type of wine, or if you think to any of the, let's say, heavy cheese with a big amount of salt, of course they would rank very low in terms of Nutri-Score. Traffic lights demonstrated efficacy in directing consumers. Examining two types of nutrition labels, the traffic lights impacted on decision making on healthiness more than the classic labels. So the red sign, even if it's a simplification, drives consumers to avoid that kind of food. Then we have to talk also about this, because in some countries it has been shown that this method to apply the Nutri-Score is not truly structured. Traffic lights labels and logos are very effective in encouraging healthy foods. Then we have the organic food labels. There is a label we use for talking about organic food. It's a European certification. So of course all European knows this logo. And so they tried to study the effect of this label. Now that it is known, so the replica, the use of any organic food label in the Pacific Ocean should be restudied, but it's interesting to know this neuroimaging study shown that there is an increased activity in the ventral striatum. Translation: there is an increased activity in the reward circuit in a part of the reward circuit in those consuming organic food. So those that already consume organic food, when seeing the logo, they activate the reward circuit. This was true, especially in the nucleus accumbens and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So what happens? This study didn't show that the logo per se can motivate in general consumers, because the increased activity of the reward circuit was not in all the consumers, but those who understood the value behind the organic food, those who actually buy that food, activates the reward circuit. So this study shown that only after you understand and you acquire a consumption pattern of organic food, when you see the logo, you react positively. So the logo itself require, let's say, a campaign of information. Or again, another study on the food labels showed that the logo fair trade can again increase the ventral striatum and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is an area of our brain related to emotion regulation, decision making. And also it tends to improve the subjective sense of taste and willingness to pay. Again, the power of logos. So again, here, when you combine, let's say, agritourism activities with geographical indication, any other type of local production, and so on, so this knowledge of the value behind the local production, you can produce similar actions and drive consumers towards ethical food. You can do it. It's not the easiest version. It needs explanation, it needs education. Fat and sugar instead, naturally, let's say, imply variation decision making, but it's still something. So that's the point, is the consumer are located in systems, and systems can affect the decision making capacity. There may be cultural factors, economic factors, laws and policies, and companies. Here we are. We have, let's say, here brain representation and the area related with the different types of reactions that our brain can have in front of several food options. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, for example, is related with the predicted value, ambiguity, working memory, and so on. The anterior cingulate cortex is related with the response resolution, choice, anxiety. The medial orbital frontal cortex is related with valuation, predicted and experienced value. Or again, the insula, for example, relates with the negative emotion. So if the insula activates in front of a food choice, of course, that's negative, and so on. And of course, the nucleo accumbens, as we've seen in the ventral striatum, are related with learning, preference, liking, motivational value, because as we've seen, it's the reward circuit. So of course, predicted value, working memory, remembered value, so the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, are activated in the case we have to activate this area. So I make an example. If I already tried the food and I like it, of course, the remembered value play a role, the memory play a role. Or again, at the same time, if I tried the food and this food caused me negative physical effects, okay, I didn't digest it well, or even I had an infection, of course, our memory associated with the previous food consumption will affect how I process that memory. So again, there is a set of elements related to the food neuroscience within images and words. As shown before, images and words can affect our reactions, our brain reactions. It's very interesting because several studies shown that food neuroscience can be explained and can be studied also through the use of visuals, photos, and food. This, in the application of an agritourism, can be applied in many ways. You can display food physically. You can describe food within a menu. You can even show images and text while doing a social media campaign. So actually, images and words related to food when you want to promote an agritourism is everywhere. As we've seen before, studies concerning the physiological activation related to words concerning food is not a discovery of today, but Stats and Hammond in 1972 actually already shown this, that if you present a set of words, some are food related and some are not food related, you have an increased salivary response. If you say black is neutral. If you say pancakes, it's not neutral. If you say bacon, it's not neutral. So they shown by comparing the salivary production when even presenting some words, and you will have a reaction. So the words we use are very important to select, let's say, the description of our dishes within an agritourism. There is also another more recent study by Papies that shows that, of course, if you compare words of food related with high fats and sugar, you will have stronger reactions by consumers. So within neuroeconomics, there are many technologies you can adopt for selecting and studying the human reactions while selecting food. So there are areas that can predict food preferences, like the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, that predicted the preference formation between, in the study I showed you before, comparing Pepsi and Coca-Cola, and also the ventral striatum, which is still within the reward circuit, which is related to the food preferences. There are studies, again, showing that the declared price of wine influences the perception of wine. Or again, there is also a study that shown that the reward system is more activated in overweight people when you confront with high calories food. So as you can see here, in the past, we tried to study mostly the brain reactions in different types of food, which is one variable. I show you this food, I see your brain reaction. Lately, it has been discovered that, of course, our brain reactions have different levels of activation depending on our characteristics. For example, I showed you before that the organic food label increase the reward circuit of those buying already organic food. Instead, chocolate activates the reward system more in overweight people. So again here, essentially overweight and obese people have normally and on the average higher reactions of the reward system when they see high calorie food. So it's more difficult for them to change their dietary habits if compared to other people because also of this brain reaction. And again, of course, it has been demonstrated that the nutritional claims in the front of the package, because of course it can be also behind, increase the attention of consumers. So this has been studied by an eye tracking actions. Eye tracking research has shown that, of course, depending on where you put this nutritional variable, you can drive or not drive the attention of consumers on this. And very other studies. So we can change the direction and the motivation through food education, discovering the meaning of rare and wild herbs, adopting haute cuisine from farm to fork, workshop from farm to fork, or discovering untold stories behind food labels and local products, or again through the secrets behind sustainable fishing. You are welcome to Italy within the AgriTour project, thanks to Erasmus. And we discovered today that food is not only nutrition, it's social connection, social identity, can be based on our values, and also has a personal meaning. In other words, food is culture. Thank you.